Ira Takuto plunges into a vast black void, surrounded by white bubbles and drifting light, his final thoughts acknowledging that he has died. An empty hospital bed sits abandoned, its pillow and sheets still rumpled from recent use, as Takuto reflects that dying at 18 after a lifetime of illness was frustrating, yet somehow he accepted it with surprising calm. The sterile walls of the hospital room bear silent witness to his peaceful resignation. Takuto feels his consciousness and senses dissolving into darkness, the reality of death settling over him like a quiet, inevitable tide. Something scratches against Takuto's fingertip, a small, inexplicable contact in the middle of oblivion. Takuto registers the strange sensation, wondering if something, perhaps a rock, just touched him in the darkness. The question lingers unanswered as the void offers nothing but more floating shapes and silence. The smell of grass reaches him, and the darkness begins to crack open with growing light, pulling Takuto towards something new. Takuto finds himself seated atop a stone throne amid the towering trees and crumbling ruins of a vast, ancient forest, looking impossibly small against its grandeur. Takuto comes to his senses, his expression dazed and neutral as a single leaf drifts past his face and the rustle of the forest filters into his awareness. Takuto gazes upward at the canopy and falling leaves, wondering aloud whether this strange, beautiful place is where one goes after death. The forest air carries a distinct chill, and Takuto notices it immediately. Takuto surveys his unfamiliar surroundings from the stone seat, taking stock of where he has ended up. Takuto exhales slowly, the breath leaving him in a quiet, measured release. Despite everything, Takuto manages a small smile. The air here is remarkably fresh. Takuto's moment of quiet is broken as a woman with long hair approaches from behind and asks if he has woken up. The woman's blonde hair and face are partially visible through the falling leaves, her identity still just out of reach. Takuto's eye goes wide with sudden shock. Takuto stares in disbelief, his mind racing. What he is seeing should be impossible, and yet the dress is unmistakable. The woman with pointed ears and a distinctive black and white patterned dress comes into partial view. Takuto rises to his feet and breathes the name Atou. Atou stands before him in full, a striking elf-like woman with long blonde hair, pointed ears, and an elegant black dress, smiling as she confirms she is indeed Atou, hero unit of the country management simulation game Eternal Nations, and greets him as her king. Atou stands before him in full, a striking elf-like woman with long blonde hair, pointed ears, and an elegant black dress, smiling as she confirms she is indeed Atou, hero unit of the country management simulation game Eternal Nations, and greets him as her king. Takuto sits in quiet bewilderment, hand to his chin, unable to make sense of why Atou is here. Takuto absent-mindedly touches his own shoulder, still piecing things together. Atou stands behind him, suppressing a quiet, knowing laugh. Takuto's expression goes utterly blank. Takuto looks up at Atou, caught off guard and confused. Atou smiles warmly and reaches toward him, telling him with quiet certainty that everything is all right. A flash of memory surfaces, someone sitting alone at a computer desk, deep in the game. Another memory follows, a hand on a mouse, the two of them conquering the world together, turn by turn. Atou holds the memories close to her heart, eyes shut in quiet happiness, telling him she remembers everything, every victory, and every game over too. Atou looks at him with a bright, blushing smile and assures him directly she remembers everything about him. A flash of memory surfaces, someone sitting alone at a computer desk, deep in the game. Another memory follows, a hand on a mouse, the two of them conquering the world together, turn by turn. Silhouetted fantasy races stand assembled as Atou describes Eternal Nations, a turn-based fantasy world domination game played across tens of hours. Takuto spent his bedridden days cycling from one medication to the next, abandoned by his parents, finding in the game an escape long enough to fill the silence, and occasionally, a game over. So absorbed was he in the game that his loneliness simply ceased to exist. In the end, his dedication carried him all the way to the top of the global rankings, earning him the title of legendary player. The screen confirms it, rank 1, extraordinary stats, and Takuto reflects that it was all made possible by the unit called Atou, his one and only achievement before death. Atou reaches her hand toward him with a radiant smile, announcing him as the first and only player to clear nightmare difficulty leading the hardest nation, Mynoghra, the civilization of ruin, the officially recognized legend, Ira Takuto. Takuto jolts upright in surprise, demanding to know how she could possibly know about that. Atou meets his shock with a simple, confident answer. She remembers everything too. Atou reaches her hand toward him with a radiant smile, announcing him as the first and only player to clear nightmare difficulty leading the hardest nation, Mynoghra, the civilization of ruin, the officially recognized legend, Ira Takuto. Takuto looks down somberly, admitting that relying on Atou had always been his strategy and his way of playing. He covers his face, quietly confessing that because his body was always weak, he may have wanted to become someone like her. Even so, he tells her sincerely, he is genuinely glad he gets to speak with her like this. Takuto asks whether this is heaven and whether she brought him here, and Atou replies plainly that she did not, she simply found herself here. Atou taps her chin thoughtfully, adding that if she had to guess, this place is probably not heaven either. Standing together in the dense, dark forest, the two of them take in the world around them, and it feels unmistakably like the world of eternal nations. Atou studies their surroundings carefully, reading the environment with quiet focus. The two of them face each other among the trees, a moment of wordless understanding passing between them. Takuto looks at his own hands, letting the reality of this unknown world settle over him. Atou begins to speak, acknowledging that what she is about to say may sound like a cliché, but it might just be a miracle. She steps toward him, her next words left hanging in the air. Standing together in the dense, dark forest, the two of them take in the world around them, and it feels unmistakably like the world of eternal nations. Atou studies their surroundings carefully, reading the environment with quiet focus. Atou kneels before Takuto and takes both of his hands in hers, asking him with quiet, earnest hope whether the two of them might start over together, and Takuto can only respond with stunned surprise. Atou pulls his hands closer, pressing on, they do not know where they are, she tells him. Takuto struggles to keep up, visibly overwhelmed, as Atou rattles off the possibilities, the game world, his world, or something else entirely. Atou smiles at him, warm and certain, and proposes it simply, just the two of them, building their own kingdom. In a burst of enthusiasm, Atou shakes his hands and tells him they can be just like they used to be. The two of them stand together in a wide forest clearing, the weight of the moment settling around them. Takuto stares at his open palms and laughs softly to himself. A kingdom, huh? His expression hardens into quiet resolve. He wants to test what he can do now that he finally has a body that can move freely. Takuto turns to Atou and simply says her name. Atou smiles brightly and answers him, my king. The two of them stand together in a wide forest clearing, the weight of the moment settling around them. Takuto extends his hand toward her and declares that they will build their own country, a kingdom, just for the two of them. Atou clears her throat with theatrical ceremony. Atou strikes a dramatic pose and introduces herself in full, Atou the bastard sludge, child of the world-ruining mud, inviting him to sink as low as they can together. A system message materializes against the dark. A new game begins, with Ira Takuto as the player, leading the evil civilization of Mynoghra on an unknown difficulty. Takuto and Atou face each other and shake hands, both smiling, a pact quietly sealed. Takuto rubs the back of his head sheepishly, admitting the whole thing is a little embarrassing, while Atou blushes and agrees, though she is glad they did it. Takuto leans forward with fired-up energy, reminding his one and only subject what their evil nation of Mynoghra must do first to set the world on the path to ruin, and Atou answers without missing a beat. Takuto's expression turns sharp and proud as he declares that he was the only player who ever cleared the game with this nation, and now he will reveal that secret playstyle. Takuto throws his fist into the air and announces their grand strategy with total conviction. They are becoming shut-ins. Atou matches his energy completely, crying out her wholehearted agreement. They will shut themselves in. The two of them raise their arms to the sky in the middle of a barren landscape, as Takuto explains, despite its fearsome reputation, Mynoghra's civilization trait is built entirely around internal administration, with a combat handicap that makes it a nation specialized purely in domestic affairs. A tall, dark silhouetted figure stands amid foliage and speaks of an omen of disaster. The shadowy figure mutters gravely about the forest in the dark continent, the great cursed lands. The figure wonders aloud why something is happening now, all of a sudden. A smaller silhouetted figure approaches from behind and informs the larger one that it is time, and addresses them as Your Holiness. A tall, dark silhouetted figure stands amid foliage and speaks of an omen of disaster. The two shadowy figures are addressed, the smaller one calling the taller one cardinal. The cardinal's silhouette turns away, stating there is a matter they wish to discuss. A deafening, bone-rattling screech tears through the air and sends Takuto and Atou lurching back in shock. The two shadowy figures are addressed, the smaller one calling the taller one cardinal. Takuto and Atou freeze, sweating and wide-eyed, as the horrible sound continues from somewhere just out of sight. A large black insectoid creature with a single giant eye and countless hairy legs erupts into view, trailing dark liquid. It is a scout unit, a long-legged bug produced in an emergency. Takuto and Atou stand calmly before the shrieking creature, and Atou states plainly that it is, in fact, absolutely disgusting, a sentiment Takuto wholeheartedly shares, noting that seeing it in 3 dimensions is a bit much compared to its in-game model. Takuto clears his throat and addresses the bug with forced authority. Speaking in the name of Mynoghra, Takuto extends his hand and commands the creature to go scout the surrounding area. The bug tilts its head with a questioning screech. The creature vibrates and sprays as Takuto adds the key condition: avoid contact with any other beings. Surveying is the priority. The bug unit rockets off into the distance at terrifying speed, leaving Takuto and Atou watching it disappear. Atou reflects with mild relief. She had her doubts, but the creature is obeying orders properly, just like a game unit. Takuto confirms with a small smile that he can share the bug's vision to a degree, small glimpses of the forest already filtering through. Atou notes that things seem to be going smoothly for now, then asks how much mana Takuto still has. Takuto runs through the numbers. He started with 200 MP, spent 100 on the emergency production of the bug, leaving 100 remaining, and while he can produce anything with enough mana, the emergency production cost is steep and should not be used carelessly, though knowing where they are was worth it. Walking through the forest together, Takuto notes they still have mana but cannot afford to waste any more of it. Atou declares with enthusiasm that she will give everything as their militia, before immediately walking back the confidence. Takuto thinks it through carefully. Atou is a hero unit who grows stronger over time, but right now her combat power sits at just 3, and depending on what they encounter, she could easily be overwhelmed. Takuto frets over the fact that Atou's high potential paired with her painfully slow, early growth is a big part of why Mynoghra is considered so difficult. Atou laughs it off nervously. Yes, it has always been like this. An explosion tears through the dense forest, sending debris and smoke scattering in all directions. A fast slashing impact cuts through the air, sending sparks flying. Takuto sits back on a stone block and notes that while the bug has surveyed most of the terrain, it is forest as far as the eye can see. This place might be far larger than it appears. Atou notices something concerning. There are no food resource icons anywhere, and not a single wild animal or monster has appeared. Atou acknowledges that forest terrain's concealment effect works in their favor, but points out that the complete absence of wildlife is strange. Takuto scratches the back of his head and concludes they will have to keep scouting, while Atou droops beside him, apologizing for being no help. Takuto raises his fist slightly, composing himself as Atou watches. Atou looks down with a flustered, bashful expression. Takuto turns to her with a gentle smile and tells her plainly, just having her around is enough. Atou's eyes go wide and her cheeks flush a deep red. Atou leans in with a blazing smile and declares she is extremely happy right now, while Takuto recoils with wide, sweaty eyes. Atou clasps her hands together near her chest, surrounded by sparkles, radiating pure delight. Takuto manages an awkward smile, conceding internally that for a hero of an evil nation, Atou can be surprisingly, unexpectedly cute. Then a sudden thought strikes him and his eye snaps wide open. Takuto studies Atou carefully and asks directly, is this how her personality has always been? Atou leans in close as Takuto turns away flustered, and she calls him back to attention. He apologizes, caught off guard. A frantic, chittering signal from the bug unit blasts directly into Takuto's ear. Takuto claps a hand to his ear in alarm and tells Atou that the bug is making contact. He is going to share its vision. The bug crouches in the underbrush, its glowing eyes fixed on something ahead. Through the bug's eyes, a settlement comes into view, tents and cloaked figures moving through the trees just beyond the foliage. A cloaked figure pores over a map while another rests by a wooden cart. Takuto whispers, trying to identify what he is looking at. Takuto and Atou sit side by side in a blank, wide-eyed daze as the shared vision washes over them. It appears to be a dark elf settlement. Crouched behind a bush, Takuto and Atou observe the dark elves passing nearby, and Takuto notes with cautious relief that dark elves are neutral-leaning evil, which could work in their favor. Takuto breaks into a stressed sweat as he realizes just how close the settlement is, warning Atou that these could be lawful dark elves, and that if this is another nation's colony, they are in serious trouble. Takuto clutches his head in despair. Sharing a border with another nation this early in the game would be the absolute worst possible outcome. Takuto points with sweaty conviction and declares that if it comes to it, they run, war is barbaric, and running is winning, while Atou laughs nervously beside him. Takuto announces the plan with a nervous smile. They will observe the dark elves and gather more information, and if things escalate. Atou's expression shifts in an instant, sharp and alert, her body tensing at something. A pair of large, heavy boots step onto stone directly nearby. Takuto and Atou snap their heads upward and to the right. Both of their faces go pale with wide-eyed shock as the word escapes them, ah. A tall, imposing dark elf looms over them with a cold glare, two more emerging from the forest behind him, while Takuto and Atou look up in stunned, sweating silence. Dark elves. A group of elves slump against the trees in exhaustion, some with their heads hanging low. More elves collapse across the forest floor, their bodies giving out beneath them as labored breaths escape their lips. One elf sits defeated on the ground while another leans over them near a great tree, neither with the strength to speak. An elven child's face is slick with sweat, eyes shut, completely spent. Dia stares downward, his expression hard and troubled. Even the children they've rationed their last food for are on the verge of collapse. His sharp eyes harden with resolve as he accepts the grim truth. They cannot go on traveling like this. Elder Molter, staff in hand and beard long with age, calls out Gia's name from somewhere behind him. Gia turns his head back, addressed now by his full title, Captain. Gia stands in the foreground as Elder Molter makes his way toward him through the darkened wood. Gia turns to face Molter, already bracing for the argument, insisting that whatever the elder says, they have no choice but to press on. Molter raises a calm hand. He knows he can no longer stop them, but asks only that Gia hear him out first. Molter warns that this cursed forest bordering the uncharted lands may look lush, but something evil is said to be sealed within its depths, and looming behind him, a colossal dark silhouette with glowing white eyes makes that warning terrifyingly real. Gia turns to face Molter, already bracing for the argument, insisting that whatever the elder says, they have no choice but to press on. Gia pushes Molter for details about this so-called king of ruin, but the elder urges caution rather than answers. Their kin are starving, the forest is strange, and Gia refuses to let superstition stop them, pressing forward with grim determination as the faces of their weakened people hang in his mind. Gia and a companion freeze at the sight ahead. A dark-haired girl stands calmly by a stone structure, and beside her looms a towering shadow that should not exist. Gia's face goes pale, sweat beading on his skin as the sight before him stops him cold. The girl stands at ease while the massive pitch-black figure behind her pulses with a deep, rumbling presence, its glowing eyes cutting through the dark. Gia forces himself to think. The thing has a human shape, but that is all he can make out. One of the elves stumbles backward in pure terror. Every instinct in Gia screams the same verdict. That thing is evil given form. The shadowy figure advances with a slow, heavy presence, each movement accompanied by a deep, resonating weight. Gia steels himself in silence, painfully aware that whatever choice he makes next could determine the survival of his entire people. The girl and her shadowy companion stand upon the stone platform, surveying the elves from above. Gia lowers himself into a deep, deliberate bow. Gia walks forward toward the girl as the others watch anxiously from the cover of the trees. Every word he speaks must count. The shadowy figure advances with a slow, heavy presence, each movement accompanied by a deep, resonating weight. Gia introduces himself and his clan, the Dark Elves of the Mazaramo, and names himself their captain. Kneeling on the ground, Gia identifies himself by name, Gia Najiv. Still bowing, Gia acknowledges what must be a noble being before him and offers an apology for entering this forest without permission, while behind him, the elf girl with glasses stares on in wide-eyed shock. The girl tilts her head and touches a finger to her chin. She seems to appreciate that he already understands the gravity of what he has done. The girl smiles and raises her hands with an almost theatrical grace, inviting this dark fae to explain what reason he had to commit such a trespass. Gia sweats and labors for breath, still bowed, trying desperately to find the right words. Gia's eyes flick toward the shadow and the girl. He knows that whatever the girl is, she and that evil thing are connected. A flash of his starving people crosses Gia's mind as he recounts how the Mazaramo clan once lived at the heart of the Idaragia continent. She may be dangerous, but she may also be the only chance they have. Gia carefully begins to lay out the history of how their former masters, the supreme elven governing body, brought ruin upon them, choosing every word with agonizing precision. The girl snaps at him to get to the point. The bespectacled elf blurts it out in a panic. They were persecuted and driven from their land. Gia seethes internally, furious at the interruption. He had wanted to frame their situation carefully, and now that chance is gone. Gia casts a wary glance toward the shadowy figure. Gia studies the shadow and the girl. Whatever that thing is, it seems unbothered by the elves entirely. The shadow speaks, and its first words are a blunt observation that the elves look awfully thin. The bespectacled elf blurts it out in a panic. They were persecuted and driven from their land. Gia seethes internally, furious at the interruption. He had wanted to frame their situation carefully, and now that chance is gone. Gia stares in stunned disbelief. That thing actually spoke. The shadow looms in profile as Gia stands frozen behind it, barely able to process that it can talk. A blonde elf nearby reacts with sharp surprise, a startled sound escaping her lips. Unable to stand on ceremony any longer, Gia kneels low with the bespectacled elf trembling behind him and confesses that they fled here under brutal persecution. Gia stares in stunned disbelief. That thing actually spoke. Gia admits they drained their supplies running from their pursuers and came to this place hoping to lose them. He catches himself rambling again, and on top of that, they failed to find any food. The shadow's voice cuts back that doesn't answer the question. Gia looks utterly drained as the true weight of it comes out. Some of them have not eaten in days. The shadow falls silent and considers. The bespectacled elf watches on, her face tight with worry and sweat. She snaps her gaze upward, suddenly catching something unexpected. Gia is flat on the ground in a full prostration while the blonde elf stands over him, studying him with quiet concern. The shadow stands still as the blonde elf watches from behind. Jia explains desperately that their only option now is to beg for mercy, purely because they dared to enter this forest. One of the male elves looks up with raw anguish twisting his face. Bespectacled elf stares downward, sweat and despair written all over her. Why must they be punished like this? In a flash of memory, elves huddle together in the forest as one of them cries out, all they ever wanted was to live in peace. Jia's fist presses hard against the ground as he kneels, knuckles white and silent. Against a void of black, a single anguished question hangs in the air: is wanting to survive really a sin? Jia's head snaps up, startled by something suddenly landing before him. A large apple rolls to a stop directly in front of where Jia kneels. The shadow extends its hand and offers a single word, here. The shadow explains that it is an apple, and that it pairs wonderfully with rabbit. Three elves depicted in a small, cartoonish style perk up and sniff the air: an apple, they murmur, and rabbit. Jia lifts the apple close and marvels at it. The scent is intensely sweet, and it feels heavy with moisture unlike any fruit he has ever seen. Jia stares at it, bewildered. He has never encountered a fruit like this in his life. More fruit suddenly rains down, sending Jia scrambling in surprise. One of the elves bites into the fruit, and his whole face transforms. It is extraordinary, an eruption of pure joy as the sweetness hits. The bespectacled elf eats with flushed cheeks and sparkling eyes, marveling at how incredibly fresh it is. Jia looks up as the shadow tosses down even more fruit, though he scrambles to keep some decorum among his people. The shadow, still seated, lobs down pears without ceremony. Jia gapes at the pears on the ground, completely thrown. The blonde elf steps in and tells Jia firmly to accept it. It is a gift from her king. The bespectacled elf and a male elf eat with abandon, life, and color visibly returning to their faces. Jia steadies himself. He can still move. He turns toward the shadow and the blonde elf with a determined look. Giving this to him is not enough. The blonde elf looks back at Jia with a confused tilt of her head. Jia's face tightens with urgency as he explains that among those who fled with him into this land are children, and those children are starving. The shadow stands motionless in the distance. Jia presses on. His people have gone days without food and are growing weaker by the hour. More fruit sits on the ground, this generous offering laid bare. Jia leans his head against the cold stone, back turned, voice breaking. He wants this gift given to the children. He begs from where he kneels, not for himself, but for the children. The blonde elf watches in silence as Jia's plea hangs in the air. The shadowy figure looms, its glowing eyes giving nothing away. A hooded elven woman sits against a tree, softly singing to the child cradled in her arms. She looks down at the child with quiet sorrow and promises to keep singing. She presses her lips gently to the child's forehead and murmurs that they will sleep together. She tells the child not to be afraid. Jia's voice shatters the quiet as he shouts for them to hold on. His voice cracks with desperation as he cries for them to wake up. A male elf rushes toward the woman and child with a bowl as she looks up at him with hollow, vacant eyes. Jia thrusts out a bowl and spoon. They mash the fruit, and he orders her to eat it immediately. The woman stares down at the bowl in dazed disbelief. Jia kneels before her beneath the trees, and she recognizes him. Barely above a whisper, she says his name. Jia brings the spoon to the child's lips and tells them firmly, "Food is here, now eat." The child takes the first bite. The child chews slowly as Jia watches on, whispering please. The child keeps eating, each small movement of their jaw a quiet victory. A female elf wipes the last of the food from her lips and swallows. Two elves stare at each other, expressions caught somewhere between disbelief and overwhelming relief. An elder elf sinks to his knees before Captain Jia, clutching something tightly and repeating his thanks over and over again. Two elves sit together around a fire, quietly eating from their bowls. Two young elves shovel food into their mouths with eager, grateful energy. One elf stirs a large pot while another watches. Somewhere behind them, a meal is being made for everyone. Two elves clasp hands or press them to their chests, faces alight with gratitude. An older bearded elf sits in profile, quietly tearing into bread and holding a bowl of warm soup. Exhausted elves lie sprawled among piles of provisions, finally sleeping in peace. A crescent moon hangs above the silhouetted treetops in the still night. Jia stands beside a towering pile of food sacks as the bespectacled elf hauls the last one into place. Having this many provisions feels almost unreal. The bespectacled elf beams at him, her eyes bright. All of this is because of him. From somewhere in the dark forest, a furious voice tears through the quiet. Jia has been tricked. The older elf erupts at Jia. An evil being doesn't hand out gifts without demanding something in return, and using the words of reverence for something like that is an outrage. The three of them stand in the small glow of a campfire, the argument simmering between them. Jia's jaw clenches, his frustration boiling over as he demands to know what else he was supposed to do. He shouts back in his own defense. The only reason they have the energy to argue right now is because that being fed them. Jia looks at his people resting peacefully and thinks of what that charity made possible. Their people are fed and asleep. A pile of round fruit sits quietly on the ground. Jia stares ahead, the contradiction sitting heavy in his chest, even if it is an evil being. Jia looks downward in defeat while the older elf stands behind him, his own expression shadowed with sorrow. What else could any of them have done? The older elf's eyes hold the same weight, caught between anger and a grief he cannot resolve. Jia looks at his people resting peacefully and thinks of what that charity made possible. Their people are fed and asleep. A blonde girl with twintails rounds on someone furiously, demanding to know why precious mana was wasted like that. A young man in a yukata sits cross-legged looking up at her while she stands over him mid-lecture. He says the more he heard, the more he felt for them, and she fires back that that is not good enough. He holds his hands up calmly and asks, they needed at least that much for their people, didn't they? He admits he was worried it still wouldn't be enough as the two of them stand silhouetted in the forest night. The young man looks at her with easy calm and says simply, he felt sorry for them. The blonde girl stares at him, caught off guard by the plainness of it. He walks past her without ceremony as she reaches after him in alarm. He extends his open palm forward, and from it, a swirling smoke or light begins to take shape. Jia and the bespectacled elf look down in shock as a glowing light materializes on the ground before them. Several elves stumble backward, drenched in sweat, utterly unable to comprehend what they are seeing. Jia and the bespectacled elf stand before a massive mountain of food and supplies, enough to feed everyone. A floating text panel describes the Emergency Production Command, a policy that uses mana to manufacture goods of all kinds, from raw materials to food, though its cost scales with the complexity of what is made and cannot produce strategic resources. Jia looks out across the enormous heap of fresh produce and food, struck completely speechless. The young man and the blonde girl stand back and watch as the elves cry out their overwhelming gratitude. Several elves stumble backward, drenched in sweat, utterly unable to comprehend what they are seeing. Jia and the bespectacled elf stand before a massive mountain of food and supplies, enough to feed everyone. The young man walks away with his hands behind his head while the elves bow deeply at his back. He looks sheepish and a little exasperated as she stares him down with a weary sigh. He admits he just couldn't help it, and she tells him that is not a good enough reason either. He scratches the back of his head and mentions, almost as an afterthought, that the dark elves seem to be acting a bit strange. She erupts at him mid-thought while he claps his hands over his ears to drown her out. Above the moonlit canopy, a final quiet note lingers. There are many difficult days ahead for their nation. Atou stares in bewildered delight at a strange piece of food while two dark elf children watch on. Thought bubbles above them depicting an apple being sliced into the shape of a rabbit. A gift from the King of Mynoghra, as tasty as it is mysterious. Introducing Chapter 3, Negotiation. Atou sulks with her cheeks puffed out, radiating pure indignation. Takuto gently tries to lift Atou's spirits as she stands with arms crossed, stubbornly refusing to look at him. Atou huffs and looks away, hotly insisting that she is absolutely, positively not upset. Takuto explains that their mana must be conserved carefully and that he regrets having spent it so carelessly on what is labeled an emergency production. Takuto's expression falls, a shadow of guilt crossing his face. Atou turns toward Takuto with a startled look as he quietly admits there is something he needs her help with. Atou snaps to attention, surprise written plainly across her face. Atou throws herself into a deep bow before Takuto, shouting her apology for the disgrace of defying her king and begging his forgiveness. Atou leans in toward Takuto with clasped hands, moved by his confession that he cannot accomplish this without her. Atou lights up with sparkling excitement at the revelation that producing just a small amount of food is all that's needed, while Takuto looks considerably less certain about her enthusiasm. Takuto awkwardly averts his gaze and admits he struggled to speak properly the day before, as a tiny Atou peers in from the corner in disbelief. Atou taps her chin thoughtfully, noting that Takuto actually pulled off a convincing performance as a stern, tight-lipped king in front of the dark elves. Atou continues to puzzle over his claim, genuinely unable to see where anything had gone wrong. A terrible realization crashes over Atou, her face frozen in wide-eyed shock. Takuto clasps his hands before his downcast face and quietly confesses that he believes he has a communication disorder. Takuto breaks down in tears while Atou waves her arms in a frenzy, desperately reframing his struggle as a noble, stoic quality befitting a king who only speaks to those he truly trusts. And Takuto recalls, in a long and heavy moment, that he never had much cause to talk to anyone during his years in the hospital. Atou strikes a bold, confident pose, declaring with a grin that wealth and military power can solve any problem this world throws at them. A small bird-like creature lets out a shrill, ear-splitting shriek, and Atou shoots it an irritated glare. Takuto points behind him to where a large insectoid creature has appeared, explaining that he called it back to their base. Atou addresses the insect creature with impatience, making clear they are far too busy for interruptions. Takuto falls quiet, a thoughtful look settling over him. A small group of dark elves moves through the forest, their approach now confirmed. Takuto and Atou sit together on the stone ruins, and Takuto reasons that the elves have likely come to collect the rest of the food, after which he intends to send them out of the forest. Takuto grips his head in distress, the weight of his inability to speak properly pressing down on him as he agonizes over how he could ever negotiate with the elves. Atou fixes him with a confident smile and tells him to leave everything to her. She has a plan. The dark elf elder bows his head to the ground, expressing deep gratitude for the honor of this audience. The elder introduces himself as Molter Cordal Mazaramu, leader of the dark elf clan, as he and his people prostrate themselves before Takuto and Atou. Atou stands over them with cool authority and tells Molter to say whatever else it is he came to say. The dark elf elder bows his head to the ground, expressing deep gratitude for the honor of this audience. Takuto watches nervously as the memory of Atou winking flashes through his mind, her plan to keep role-playing as powerful figures, and he quietly panics, knowing full well they are anything but. Molter remains prostrate as he acknowledges that one of his younger clanmates behaved rudely during their last encounter, and he has come to offer his personal apologies on their behalf. Seen from behind the bowing elder, Takuto and Atou are framed above as Molter continues, extending the clan's profound gratitude for the life-saving supplies they received. Atou smiles with smug superiority, smoothly spinning the young elf's earlier rudeness as an understandable reaction to being in the presence of such a magnificent being, while Takuto sweats beside her. Takuto fixes his gaze on the elves with quiet intensity. Molter presses his hands together and humbly asks on behalf of his entire race to be honored with the name of the great being before them. Takuto registers the question with mild surprise, and Atou turns to him expectantly. Takuto reflects quietly that he never actually gave his name the last time they met. Atou steps forward before the bowing elves, ready to speak. Atou erupts with grand, sweeping proclamation, commanding the elves to burn into their memory the name of the ruler of ruin, king of the apocalypse, Ira Takuto, and that he is to be addressed as nothing less than Ira-sama. Atou erupts with grand, sweeping proclamation, commanding the elves to burn into their memory the name of the ruler of ruin, king of the apocalypse, Ira Takuto, and that he is to be addressed as nothing less than Ira-sama. Molter presses himself to the ground, his hand gripping his staff. Atou introduces herself with a cool smile, pointedly clarifying that she is not to be addressed with the same title as Takuto, and in the same breath, waves off any need for them to bother remembering her name at all. The elder presses his forehead to the earth before them both and solemnly vows that their names will be engraved at the very depths of the clan's souls. Atou stands and Takuto sits in silence as the elder's oath hangs in the air. Takuto lets out a small, uneasy smile, relieved that things seem to be moving in the right direction despite his earlier worries. Atou blinks in open surprise. Atou's expression shifts with quiet calculation as she prepares to move the meeting forward. Atou waves a dismissive hand and tells the elves to collect their food and be gone, warning that some of it is already on the verge of spoiling. The elder jolts in shock at her abrupt dismissal. Takuto stares at Atou, caught off guard by the sudden shift in tone. The elder looks up with desperate, tearful eyes, pleading for the chance to offer something in return for having their lives saved. Atou gazes down at him with cold composure and asks whether they have anything that could possibly satisfy her king. The elder shrinks with shame, sweating as he admits that his people are too ignorant to even conceive of something worthy of such a being. Atou turns her back on him entirely, and Takuto watches from his seat as she declares flatly that they want nothing from them then. Takuto watches the exchange with a puzzled frown, wondering to himself whether Atou has simply lost interest. Atou's expression remains unreadable. The elder hunches over in despair as Takuto grows visibly anxious, internally insisting he wants this meeting to end on peaceful terms. Atou repeats coolly that they want nothing, while Takuto splutters in the background, clearly wanting to say something, and Atou snaps back that she would never do anything underhanded. Atou whirls around furiously, shouting a denial at Takuto's unspoken suspicion that she is scheming something. The three of them are frozen in a tense tableau, Atou fuming with crossed arms, Takuto smiling stiffly, and the elder still bowing low. Takuto's forced grin stretches across his face as he internally acknowledges, with wide-eyed clarity, that this is a complete disaster. Takuto studies Atou's turn back and resolves he cannot let this continue, clearing his throat to regain control of the situation. Atou spins around to face him at once, addressing him as her king. Takuto quietly calls Atou's name. Atou puffs out her cheeks in frustration and vents to Takuto that these people are absolutely terrible at negotiating. A tiny, frantic Atou flails at Takuto in exasperation. Takuto tries to calm her down, gently noting she is not exactly a master negotiator herself, and Atou, completely undeterred, suggests they simply kill everyone before they become a threat. Takuto gestures frantically and urges her to wait, insisting that surely both sides can walk away from this with something to gain. Takuto thinks through the situation, watching the collapsed elder in the background and reasoning that even if the elves survive this time, they will soon return to life with nowhere to sleep and nothing to eat. Chibai versions of the characters play out Takuto's reasoning, that as an evil-aligned faction, they are already viewed with deep suspicion, and Atou's behavior will only make the elves more uneasy and more likely to become a problem. Atou's eyes light up with stars as she beams at Takuto, awed as always by his thinking. Takuto smiles and suggests they ask for something in return, enough to make the elves feel the exchange is fair. Takuto sits back with a small, contented smile, admitting he is in no rush. He wants to enjoy this exchange a little longer. Atou straightens up with a smirk and addresses the elves, declaring it is frankly exhausting how foolish they are, imagining, of all things, that Takuto is some kind of evil spirit. Atou continues her rebuke, her words hanging in the air. Atou cuts off further protest with a sharp command, declaring that the word of her king is absolute. Atou announces with grand ceremony that the king has graciously decreed he will accept tribute in exchange for his offering. The elder looks up in a fluster, stammering that they would never dream of treating their king as anything unworthy. The elder lifts his gaze from the ground and asks with trembling relief if they are now forgiven. Atou turns to Takuto with hands pressed to her mouth, her voice tight with urgency as she insists that whatever is offered must be of equal value. Atou's composure cracks entirely as she throws herself on Takuto's mercy with a desperate, almost comedic plea for help. Takuto looks downward as Atou reaches toward him, her voice carrying a pointed demand, make them talk about the world outside. A long, loaded silence hangs in the air from somewhere just out of sight. Takuto stares downward, his flat expression betraying nothing but quiet exasperation. Three small figures gaze upward, waiting. Jia bows low, hands pressed together, his compliance absolute and immediate. Atou stands firm with quiet authority while a startled Takuto listens as she declares the bargain complete. This will have to be enough to seal the deal. Takuto lays out his thinking. Two reasons stand between him and letting the dark elves remain in the forest. Three figures from distinct civilizations stand as a warning. If this world mirrors the logic of eternal nations, then different peoples with different mindsets are a powder keg waiting to ignite. A ravaged battlefield strewn with debris and arrows speaks without words to what conflict between civilizations leaves behind. Takuto's expression darkens as he reveals the second problem. Dark elves are neutrally aligned, and that alignment clashes with the evil nature of Mynoghra. Three dark elves stand together, baffled by the label being placed on them. Neutral, apparently, is the problem. The conclusion is blunt. Mynoghra's cursed land is simply not a place where neutral-aligned people can flourish. Takuto mulls it over, acknowledging that having them here is a complication, but something makes him hesitate before following that thought to its conclusion. Jia's face falls into a look of quiet desperation as he begs the king for permission to remain in the forest. Takuto watches Jia with a resigned expression. He had already seen this coming. Atou's patience runs out as she shouts back at Jia, arm outstretched, making it perfectly clear the forest is not theirs to keep. Jia goes silent, eyes closed, accepting the weight of the moment. The two elves behind Jia react differently. One burns with quiet defiance, the other sags under the reality of their situation. Takuto crosses his arms, his conscience twisting. Abandoning them after feeding them would leave a bitter taste he can't shake. Takuto's thoughts pull him in two directions at once, the weight of practical reason pushing against something that feels uncomfortably like guilt. Takuto tilts his head in quiet deliberation, noting simply that they look exhausted. Jia kneels before Takuto with solemn gratitude, formally thanking the great king for granting them an audience. Atou snaps at Takuto in hushed alarm, clearly sensing he's about to do something she didn't sanction. Takuto allows himself a small smile, privately reminding himself that he once carried the title of legendary player. He has played this kind of role before. Jia and his companion look up toward Takuto, waiting. Takuto raises his hand and glowing orbs bloom above his palm as he reminds himself. He carries the power of a king now. Jia stands steady, staff in hand, meeting Takuto's gaze. Takuto makes up his mind and something in his voice shifts. This is happening. The words land like a thunderclap. Takuto invites the Dark Elves to become his citizens, leaving both Atou and Jia frozen in stunned disbelief. The words land like a thunderclap. Takuto invites the Dark Elves to become his citizens, leaving both Atou and Jia frozen in stunned disbelief. The words land like a thunderclap. Takuto invites the Dark Elves to become his citizens, leaving both Atou and Jia frozen in stunned disbelief. Atou stares at Takuto, completely blindsided, scrambling to process what she just heard. Atou shouts at the Dark Elves to hold their position while she pulls Takuto aside to deal with this herself. The three Dark Elves stand at a distance, exchanging uncertain glances. Atou rounds on Takuto in a frantic panic, arms waving. They are neutrally aligned, she reminds him, as if he could have possibly forgotten. Takuto holds up a single calm finger and walks her through it, the refugee system would shift their alignment to Mynoghra's, solving the very problem she's screaming about. Atou's panic shifts into cautious deliberation as she raises the next concern. Conflict with Mynoghra's core races is still a real risk. Takuto smiles and steers the conversation toward a very specific creature. The bug, he says, remember the bug. Atou grimaces beside a grotesque, unsettling creature as a stat screen reveals the homunculus useful in population and resources, but a nightmare to share living space with. Takuto admits it plainly. Not only is communication with the thing impossible, but its appearance alone is a genuine drain on his mental well-being. Atou quietly acknowledges the silver lining. At least Takuto has found something he actually cares about. Atou moves toward Takuto with a new resolve. A decision is forming. Atou faces the Dark Elves and lays out the king's offer: join Mynoghra, and your safety is guaranteed. 3 Dark Elves listen closely, the elder among them looking upward with quiet attention. The offer hangs in the air: become citizens, and the nation will provide. One of the younger Dark Elves looks up, visibly shaken by the weight of the choice before him. The elder Dark Elf strokes his chin and asks the question none of them can avoid: what exactly does becoming a citizen mean for them? Atou cuts straight to it. She cannot promise them happiness, but she will not lie to them either. Joining Mynoghra means becoming evil. Atou lets a slow, knowing smile creep across her face as she tells them, with just a hint of dangerous charm, that this side is surprisingly enjoyable. 2 days pass, and Takuto and Atou make their way deeper into the forest. Takuto walks ahead with a smile, assuring a quietly worried Atou that he is moving well enough on his own. Atou chews over her uncertainty. Will the Dark Elves actually follow through on their pledge as citizens? Takuto answers her with easy confidence. They will not know until they try, but he believes there is real value in bringing them in. Takuto explains the homunculus's flaw: it breeds fast and stays content, but it simply lacks the intelligence to keep up. Takuto makes his case with enthusiasm. Dark Elves can study and fight, which means Mynoghra's research will finally stop falling behind other nations. Takuto drives home the point that matters most to him. Unlike the homunculus, Dark Elves can actually hold a conversation, and that, he insists, is enormous. Atou spots the Dark Elf camp just ahead and takes point, moving out front while Takuto follows close behind. 2 Dark Elves freeze, sweat breaking out on their faces as something unexpected unfolds before them. Atou steps into the clearing as the assembled Dark Elves throw themselves to the ground before her. The Dark Elves bow low before a stone throne, the weight of ceremony settling over the forest clearing. 2 Dark Elves in the foreground warn each other in hushed fear: do not look directly at him, or the same fate awaits. Takuto's silhouette approaches from behind as the elder Dark Elf kneels near the throne, the moment carrying the full gravity of what is about to be decided. Takuto's silhouette looms on the throne as Atou stands at his side, his voice carrying across the bowed crowd to formally welcome the Dark Elves as immigrants to Mynoghra. Atou turns toward the king's silhouette with quiet reverence, deferring the moment entirely to him. Takuto's silhouette surveys the crowd in silence. Takuto's silhouette blazes with white eyes and a wide crescent smile as dark energy rolls off him, and the system itself announces what has just been born. Through the surge of new citizens, a nation rises under a great leader, and Mynoghra hails its king. Female elf-like character with long hair, headbands and earrings stands with her arms slightly spread and a warm smile, declaring that everyone present is now a citizen of Mynoghra. A group of hooded figures and pointed-eared individuals stand together, gazing upward or toward the center of the gathering. Standing in a forest archway beside a male silhouette, the female elf extends her arms and announces that in the name of their great king, Ira Takuto-sama, happiness and peace are promised to all. 2 male elf-like characters exchange glances with concerned, questioning expressions, murmuring to each other about whether the ceremony has finally concluded. A character in a hat or hood stands with their back turned, facing toward a speech bubble. A character's eye snaps wide open, veins visible and sweat flying, as a strangled cry bursts out of them. A silhouetted figure with glowing eyes and pointed ears stands against a chaotic backdrop of suffering and anguish, confessing that hatred is surging up from deep within. An eye stares downward wide and trembling, as a voice recalls those who persecuted and hurt them. A partially visible face contorts into a grimace with an eye clenched shut, as the memory of being laughed at and treated as worthless rises to the surface. A chaotic montage of dark elves with furious and tear-streaked faces surges forward, a torrent of hatred spilling out toward everything and everyone. A small silhouetted head floats in empty white space and quietly asks if the other is all right. A young male silhouette with spiky hair and glowing white eyes stands alone against a white background scattered with floating particles. A male elf-like character looks upward through tears and a trembling smile, overcome by the unfamiliar feeling of being protected. A male elf-like character throws his arms into the air and cries out in praise of Ira Takuto-sama. A crowd kneels and raises their arms toward two distant figures, erupting in cries of "Long live their great king." The female elf-like character smiles with her eyes closed in quiet joy beside a large-eyed silhouette who lets out a small, surprised sound. A young man with black hair sits holding a piece of paper with his hand on his chin in deep thought, while a long-haired female elf stands beside him studying the same document, as the title of Chapter 4 declares that the Evolus nation continues steadily to build up. The male character and the female elf face each other, both holding papers, and confirm in terse, flat tones that they have each read the report. The male character flings himself onto a mattress gifted by the dark elves, while the female elf watches from nearby. Face down and muffled into the mattress, the male character erupts in frustration upon learning that the two most powerful nations on the continent are hardcore good-aligned. The male character and the female elf face each other, both holding papers, and confirm in terse, flat tones that they have each read the report. The female elf clutches a map with tears welling in her eyes, explaining in growing dread that one neighboring power worships a good god and the other venerates nature, and that discovery by either would spell doom. A female character smiles with a dark, shadowed expression and offers a cheerful greeting before calmly announcing death. The male character lies flat on the ground while the female elf reads, and she confirms with a trailing silence that yes, that is exactly what would happen. The male character lies exhausted on his back on the tiled floor, lamenting that while the elder provided useful regional intelligence, he never anticipated the nations most hostile to Mynoghra would also be the dominant powers, cursing their starting position. The female elf breaks down crying while clutching a paper, wailing at Takuto-sama about the forest's productivity being zero and demanding to know how they are supposed to survive without food, minerals, or mana. Illustrations of mountains, carrots, and minerals appear as visual aids explaining that in the game, the environment normally provides a baseline yield of food and minerals even without development. A dense, twisted, overgrown dark forest looms, as the narration explains that this base yield is meant to jumpstart development, yet here, nothing can be harvested at all. A massive multi-legged silhouette looms over a fallen figure on the ground, as someone grimly states that the situation has gone far beyond the concept of difficulty. Elder Molter grips his staff and bows respectfully with a hand to his chest, greeting the king and Atou and offering to continue his explanation of the world. Molter bows while the king stands with a question mark floating beside him, and Atou turns her head back, assuring Molter that nothing is wrong. Gia strides in with a broad grin and a proud gesture, introducing his subordinate Imuru who stands nervously behind him. A slightly nervous, sweating Imuru stands at attention while Atou gestures toward her, introducing her as the nation's intelligence officer and vouching for her extensive knowledge of foreign countries and customs. Atou smiles warmly beside the king, who sits on a stone block, relaying that the king is pleased with their dedication and expressing hope for good results again today. Atou waves a dismissive hand at Gia and Molter as they kneel, telling them there is no need for such stiff formality since the king dislikes it, though she adds a pointed qualifier. Elder Molter kneels and grips his staff, solemnly accepting the instruction to refrain from formality since the king has willed it. Atou stands with clasped hands and a serene smile beside the king, explaining on his behalf that he was once an ordinary person and that stiff attitudes make him uncomfortable. Atou raises a hand to pause the group as Gia, Molter, and Imuru watch, announcing she will pick up where she left off before catching herself with something else to address first. Atou looks up with a serious expression and one hand raised, declaring that the purpose of today's meeting is to lay out their future plans. Atou's expression hardens into full authority as she informs the assembled group that, as important members of the national administration, each of them will be assigned a significant post by order of the king, with no room for debate. Elder Molter stands at attention gripping his staff as Atou assigns him primary responsibility for the country's management and notes they are counting on his magical abilities. Gia stands tall and attentive as Atou confirms he will remain captain with orders to lead the warriors of Mynoghra. Elder Molter is seen from the side clutching his staff with quiet determination as he accepts the command. Gia drives his fist firmly against his chest in a sharp salute and accepts his orders with full conviction. Gia draws his blade with a manic grin and immediately volunteers to kill anyone the king commands, even children, while a horrified Imuru clutches her head in panic beside a watching Molter. Shadowy warrior silhouettes stand ready with weapons drawn as a voice declares they will cut down countless enemies as the king's vanguard. Molter stares forward with intensity while Imuru stands at his side gripping her staff, as the voice speaks of vengeance against all who once persecuted them. Gia grins fiercely with shadows veiling his eyes, certain that the King of Ruin will be pleased. The king reacts with wide, startled eyes and sweat flying from his shadowed form, blurting out that what Gia just said is terrifying. Gia's eyes spiral into blank shock as the meaning of the king's reaction sets in. Profusely sweating Gia turns toward Atou and the king, both marked with question marks, and desperately tries to interpret whether the plan is to bring ruin to the world indirectly rather than through direct slaughter. Atou plants a hand on her hip and lectures Gia with confident authority, the king standing quietly behind her, as she declares that war is barbaric and that the king is a man of peace. Gia stares back with spiraling, sweat-drenched disbelief, completely unable to process what he just heard. Gia's shoulders sag as he is seen from behind, utterly defeated and quietly submits. Gia's face fills with a shadow of intense, gritted teeth inner turmoil as he screams internally about why the king of ruin is a pacifist. Elder Molter smirks with smug satisfaction as Gia glares daggers at him. Gia looks away in obvious irritation. Atou leans back slightly and gestures with one hand as she relays the king's casual but practical instructions. Rest up, and then start building proper houses. Molter bows with an outrageously smug smile and gushes gratitude for the king's compassionate wisdom, pointedly contrasting himself with Gia, who slumps and sulks visibly in the background. Elder Molter smiles warmly with closed eyes in a profile shot, letting out a quiet, pleased sound. A young male elf erupts in furious protest at the elder. Takuto sits on a stone ledge with his hand to his chin in thought while Atou leans in close and proposes whether to order the elves to gather materials or assign them to choose building sites. Takuto thinks to himself that while he wants them to rest, squandering their current motivation would be a waste, and he wonders what dark elves are most naturally suited for. A small, quiet realization crosses Takuto's face. Takuto raises a finger and suggests terrain improvement that works with the forest rather than against it, reasoning that elves would be well suited to the task, and Atou lights up in immediate agreement. Elder Molter modestly acknowledges that while dark elves are not as skilled as the light elves, they do prefer working with large trees over bare ground, as a small female elf with glasses watches wide-eyed behind him. Atou strides forward with enthusiasm, declaring it a very promising start as the silhouetted Takuto watches from behind. The young male elf sweats and struggles internally with the baffling reality that the King of Ruin has no desire to destroy the forest. Takuto and Atou stand together, Atou beaming with small flowers drifting around her, as she expresses her excitement about how remarkable the forest will become under the effect of encroachment-oriented. The silhouetted Takuto, eyes and mouth glowing white, instructs the group to do their best and reminds them not to forget to use the reforest ability. The young male elf, Elder Molter, and the female elf with glasses all stare back in collective confusion. Atou places a hand on her chest and agrees while noting she has a question of her own. The young male elf looks on in perplexity, genuinely asking what reforest even means. Both Takuto and Atou turn back with identically blank, stunned expressions and let out a small, bewildered sound. Atou turns to the three elves with a gesture of disbelief, asking if none of them know about reforest, and directing the question to Elder Molter specifically as the young male elf eggs him on. Elder Molter and the girl with glasses both shake their heads while the young male elf watches. Takuto and Atou huddle together in a private, murmured exchange. Atou gestures with one hand and shifts the topic, asking whether the group has any knowledge of military magic or the 6 elements, referencing that fortress construction and iron equipment had already been discussed. The nervous female elf with glasses explains that they are familiar with the 4 elements as the foundation of their magic, which is used in a support role alongside warriors, but she has never heard of military magic. The silhouettes of Takuto and Atou are seen from a distance seated on a high ledge, as Atou notes that the king is being unusually talkative. Takuto stares with troubled focus, thumb at his lip, realizing inwardly that the technological level here is far lower than he had assumed based on smelting, fishing, and fortress construction. Elder Molter gestures humbly and asks with quiet candor whether he is understanding correctly that their magical technology is much lower than the king had anticipated. Atou stands and confirms to the silhouetted Takuto that yes, they had expected the elves to have some terrain improvement technology, but the actual level is far below what was anticipated. Atou glances back over her shoulder with a cunning smile, noting that while the reason is unclear, knowing the world's magical technology is so underdeveloped means that accelerating their own development will give them an enormous advantage. Elder Molter looks up with mild surprise and a sweat drop, observing that the conversation had drifted off course. Atou explains with a small diagram floating above her head that reforest means replanting trees in previously cleared land to preserve vegetation, securing resources, and providing various other benefits. Elder Molter strokes his chin and reasons aloud that if it is simply tree planting, it does not sound like much magical knowledge is needed, though he wonders how it accounts for trees that take centuries to grow. Atou closes her eyes and places a hand on her chest with quiet confidence, clarifying that the reforest technology she is describing uses magical elements to dramatically accelerate a tree's growth. Atou throws out her arm dramatically toward the enormous looming silhouette of Takuto behind her and declares with full reverence that this knowledge was created by the great god of Mynoghra himself, Ira Takuto-sama, and that it is the truth of the world. Takuto jolts backward, wide-eyed and sweating, sputtering in total shock at what Atou just said. Atou speaks with enthusiastic momentum about how the people have witnessed the king's mercy and received the honor of citizenship, while a flustered Takuto reaches toward her from behind, desperately trying to cut her off. Atou turns with a radiant, star-filled smile and insists that the king is actually 100 times more impressive than anything they have seen so far and urges them to ask anything, as the narration dryly notes that Atou is on a rampage. The black-haired boy throws up his hands in sweating, wide-eyed protest, insisting that Atou is just making things up. The elf girl with glasses points and explains that some time ago a plague tore through the holy kingdom of Qualia with massive casualties, and that the Qualian priests blamed the deaths on a demon's curse, while behind her a group of visibly ill and distressed people bear witness to the devastation. The blonde elf girl points forward and explains with calm certainty that the real cause was the overhunting of city cats, which triggered a rat epidemic, and that the rats ate the dead and became carriers of the plague, with no predators left to control them. The elf girl with glasses looks confused while the boy explains that the true culprits are not the rats themselves, but the invisible microscopic creatures they carry, as cartoonish illustrations of typhus, spirocheta, viruses, salmonella, fleas and ticks float around them. The tall male elf and the elf girl with glasses discuss the known treatments with visible uncertainty, agreeing that bloodletting weakens the body and backfires, while prayer works but cannot be cast on such a large population. The blonde elf girl speaks with serene, closed-eyed confidence and a dark figure looming behind her, attributing the knowledge entirely to the king, while quickly denying that she herself said anything. The black-haired boy crouches on the ground, clutching his stomach, visibly exhausted and stressed. The blonde elf girl extends a glowing hand as the tall elf and the girl with glasses bow deeply behind her, invoking the king's name and promising that blessings and knowledge from the land of the gods will be bestowed upon them. The elf girl with glasses lights up and asks with a smile whether the apple the king gave them is also a food from the land of the gods, pointing upward, where illustrations of whole and sliced apples float above her. The blonde elf girl cheerfully agrees and mentions her fondness for grapes, at which point the black-haired boy stares at her flatly with a vein mark on his head and immediately bans her from eating grapes for the foreseeable future. The elf girl with glasses beams with rosy, clasped hand excitement as she reveals she planted some of the seeds from that lumpy purple fruit, and it has already begun to sprout. The blonde elf girl leans forward eagerly while the black-haired boy watches behind her, both caught up in the anticipation of watching the grape seedlings grow. The black-haired boy's eyes go wide with sudden alarm. The tall male elf erupts in furious shouting, while the elf girl with glasses cowers defensively, and the blonde elf grips her head in frustration, all of them reacting in horror that she planted a fruit from the land of the gods without the king's permission. The black-haired boy sits in a state of stunned vacancy as the blonde elf turns to look at him, while he mutters in slow realization that emergency production could be used to grow food from the other world, wondering why he had never thought of that. A single dark apple floats against a dotted background as the narration notes that everything created through emergency production was originally a gift from the other world. A solid black panel lays out the crucial realization. In-game emergency production does not generate strategic resources, but what if that limitation only applies to strategic resources that already exist within the game itself? The black-haired boy holds a glowing object in his hand and stares with quiet intensity, one eye closed, as the implication begins to take shape. The boy's single eye fixes forward in extreme focused concentration. The boy sits and stares intently at his own cupped, glowing hands. Resting in the boy's open palm is a round coin with a square hole through its center. The black-haired boy grins with fierce determination, coin outstretched, acknowledging that he will need the industry, technology, and population to mass-produce it, but insisting that with enough mana he can create the very resources that reshaped the nature of warfare in his old world. The boy slumps forward, clutching his face, and breaks into dark laughter as he confirms he has just proven he can create oil, the very substance that triggered so much conflict and killing across his old world. The black-haired boy grins with fierce determination, coin outstretched, acknowledging that he will need the industry, technology, and population to mass-produce it, but insisting that with enough mana he can create the very resources that reshaped the nature of warfare in his old world. The boy's face is consumed by deep shadow and a wide, jagged smile as he revels in how absurdly overpowered this capability is in a world that does not even know what reforest means. The blonde elf girl smiles with sly, smug amusement behind a hand, while the elf girl with glasses sweats with visible terror, meekly asking whether she should not have done what she did. The boy raises a fist with one eye shadowed in black and a sinister grin, declaring it was a blind spot, and that she actually did a fine job, as the blonde elf beside him mirrors the exact same dark, satisfied smile. A map reveals the continent of Idaragia, shaped like two great circles joined by a narrow bridge of land, as the first volume is announced for release in September 2020. The northern reaches of the continent are divided between the Holy Kingdom of Qualia, ruled by humans, and the Elementals Alliance of Elnar, ruled by elves. The southern half of the continent bears the grim name of the Dark Continent, while the north is known as the Lawful Continent. The two great nations of the north have been carefully building diplomatic relations, with one remarkable force serving as a key contributor to that progress. A woman adorned in flowing robes and an ornate floral headpiece stands with her back turned, revealed to be the ultimate weapon known as a saint, vital to the development of Mynoghra. Chaos erupts across a frozen northern landscape as figures clash violently in the snow of the Holy Kingdom of Qualia's polar belt. Desperate villagers huddle together in the bitter cold, crying out for someone, anyone, to come to their aid. The villagers drop to their knees in the snow, pleading toward a distant, glowing figure, their words spilling out in anguish as they describe the destruction of every neighboring village. Saint Soalina of Splendid Burials is introduced in all her imposing religious glory, her expression stern as she pronounces that those who bring calamity and terror upon the earth have committed an unforgivable sin. Chapter 5. Internal Affairs begins. Soalina's voice cuts through the frozen air as she declares that the time for repentance has long since passed. A man flanked by two armored knights steps forward, invoking the cries of the innocent and the voice of their peace-seeking God as he calls upon his saint. Soalina faces down a mass of dark, shadowy figures as she condemns them for defying the holy god Arlos and corrupting the order of the Holy Kingdom of Qualia. Soalina raises her staff and unleashes a massive, devastating blast of holy energy, proclaiming she will grant her enemies a splendid burial. The men shield their eyes as blinding light erupts from Soalina's attack. The shadowy creatures are consumed and disintegrated by the holy light, reduced to nothing. Where enemies once stood, only a vast blackened wasteland remains, ringed by distant mountains, as someone asks the cardinal about a conversation from the previous day. Soalina strides forward through the scorched heat while the cardinal trails behind, flustered, until she reminds him of their discussion about investigating the omen of disaster from the great cursed lands. The cardinal erupts in frustration, as Soalina suggests she will personally go to investigate if dispatching troops proves too difficult. The cardinal launches into a lecture about the bureaucratic hurdles required to mobilize the Order of Holy Knights, petitions, provisions, rewards, insisting it cannot be done on a whim. The cardinal sharpens his rebuke, warning Soalina that her thinking suggests she does not fully understand the weight of the position she now holds. The two figures stand as small silhouettes amidst a field of flowers, as the cardinal reminds Soalina that she is no longer a common laywoman. Soalina stands quietly, her gaze cast downward, absorbing the cardinal's words in silence. The cardinal seethes, frustration written plainly across his face. The cardinal turns his back on Soalina and walks away, declaring he will personally find someone capable of mobilizing troops. As the cardinal storms off, he mutters under his breath about Soalina being nothing but a peasant girl. A single eye belonging to Soalina watches everything in unreadable silence. Soalina stands before a group of villagers who bow deeply before her. Soalina stands alone with quiet resolve, but her shadow stretches out behind her in a jagged, monstrous shape as she silently vows to save her people. The scene shifts to the Mynoghra territory deep within the great cursed lands. Atou raises her fist with infectious enthusiasm, rallying a crowd of dark elves behind her who respond with equal fervor. Two dark elves haul lumber and tools through the forest, reflecting on how Takuto-sama's nation has only just begun. A voice calls out that the nation must be fortified and expanded if it is to rule over all things and all land. Elves of all kinds work across a forest clearing, carrying materials and breaking ground, rallied to take the crucial first step together. Several weeks have passed since the Dark Elves became citizens, and an elf remarks to another that everything is proceeding in an orderly fashion toward great success. Ira Takuto grins with satisfaction, celebrating that he is finally free of hospital gowns. Takuto settles proudly onto a large stone pedestal inside a wooden hall, declaring it his throne. Takuto surveys his newly constructed wooden council room from atop his makeshift throne, with the satisfaction of a ruler settling into his domain. A diagram illustrates how mana flows from happy citizens to Takuto each month, with the collected amount directly tied to how content his subjects are. Takuto's eyes light up as it clicks. The happier his people, the more developed his country becomes. Takuto leaps to his feet with a fired-up declaration that he will guide his people to the ultimate happiness with his own two hands. A Chibai Atou sparkles with approval, noting that the king appears greatly satisfied as well. Takuto sits on his throne as Atou and the dark elf elder stand before him. The elder looks toward Takuto and tells him what a great honor this is. The first topic on the agenda is announced, the plan for building facilities. Atou gestures with confident energy as she declares that food production facilities must come first, insisting that an empty stomach is no good, even if fighting is not on the agenda. The elder elf strokes his chin thoughtfully, acknowledging the importance of food, but wondering aloud whether the king couldn't simply produce unlimited amounts of it himself. Atou explains with a Chibai diagram that while the king can produce food, expanding territory will cause distribution problems, making citizen-run facilities absolutely essential, a lesson one distant elf learns the hard way. Atou and the elder share a quick laugh of agreement before getting down to business. With dramatic fanfare, a gnarled tree in a woven basket is presented to the group. The elder holds the peculiar potted tree with bewilderment as Atou enthusiastically lists off all the supporting infrastructure that will need to be built around it. The elder stares at the strange tree with deep confusion while Atou stands calmly nearby. Atou plants her hands on her hips and beams proudly as she introduces it, a flesh tree. The elder samples the fruit from the tree and finds it delicious, much to Atou's sparkling delight. The elder's expression shifts to unease as he nervously asks for a more thorough explanation of exactly what this tree is. It is revealed to be a food production facility of their civilization, a tree that bears mysterious fruit tasting exactly like human meat. The elder sweats through his composure, acknowledging that even with their alignment shifted to evil, some citizens may take issue with eating something that tastes like human flesh. Atou reassures the elder with a smile that this is merely an experiment in tree cultivation, and a system message confirms that construction of the flesh tree facility has officially begun. The second topic is introduced, the plan for research. Atou leans over a map and makes the case that technological development is critical for a small nation like theirs, arguing that access to more advanced technology is essential for growing their power. The elder asks Atou which technology they should prioritize first, mindful of their limited manpower. Atou's eyes light up with barely contained excitement as she declares magic the obvious answer, and the elder's own eyes sparkle at the prospect of expanding his knowledge in that very field. Atou raises a finger and specifies without hesitation that military magic is where they should begin. A rough diagram illustrates the limits of conventional magic. Even a powerful caster can only target a few dozen enemies at most. By contrast, a second diagram shows military magic detonating across a massive area, sending entire armies screaming into the dirt. The elder is shaken to his core, admitting that even with his pride in magic, he could barely target a few dozen people, and the idea of magic powerful enough to overpower an entire army strikes him as nothing short of a miracle. Atou cheerfully informs the sweating elder that it is actually not that difficult a technology to develop, and a system message confirms that military magic has been selected for research. The third and final topic is announced, the plan for military affairs. The king's imposing silhouette looms as he delivers his proposal with cool authority. They will create a hero. The group steps outside into the forest to continue their discussion. The elder asks what exactly is meant by a hero, while Atou claps her hands together, already delighted by the idea and praising its low cost and minimal risk. Heroes are explained as subjects of the king who begin extraordinarily powerful and only grow stronger over time, monstrous beings with a natural disposition for battle. The elves react with open-mouthed disbelief, while Atou clarifies that summoning all heroes at once is currently restricted, though one can already be called. The king explains that given their current need to maintain stealth, and the enormous costs of fielding a full army in mana, food, and upkeep, he intends to hold off on summoning one until conditions are more favorable, though he has every intention of doing so eventually. The dangers of their current vulnerability are laid out plainly. Bounty hunters could target both the wanted individuals in their group and the dark elves, who have no legal protections and could easily be sold into slavery, but a hero would eliminate all such threats at once. The elder respectfully poses the question that has been on everyone's mind: are heroes truly as powerful as claimed? The king and Atou stand together as the elves watch in curious anticipation. Atou strides forward with a confident smirk, cape sweeping behind her, and tells them it will be faster simply to show them. Dark, branch-like appendages tear their way out of Atou's back with a violent burst of energy. A dark elf male recoils in wide-eyed shock, utterly unprepared for what he is witnessing. Atou stands with her back to the onlookers as multiple long, razor-sharp dark appendages unfurl fully from her body, curving outward in every direction. Atou faces the forest with her monstrous appendages spread wide as she prepares to make her point. By the way, she is also a hero. Atou turns to face everyone with a broad grin as a massive horizontal slash has carved clean through multiple large trees behind her, declaring herself a hero. The two elves stand completely stunned, dripping with sweat. Atou's silhouette is barely visible through the chaos of falling timber and debris. Atou fixes the group with a sly, knowing look as she explains that heroes are called such because a single unit can overpower an entire army, and what they just witnessed is not even 1/100th of her fully developed power. The two elves stare upward in breathless awe, their earlier skepticism replaced by shining, reverent eyes as they proclaim that Atou's power has only deepened their understanding of just how great Ira Takuto truly is. Atou laughs with her head thrown back, assuring them all not to worry about military affairs. She will personally destroy every single enemy that stands against Takuto. Takuto stands with his back to the group, calling out Atou's name in a flat tone. Atou spins around with stars in her eyes at the sound of her liege's voice. Takuto levels an utterly unimpressed stare at Atou and tells her to clean up the mess she made with all that random tree cutting. Takuto turns and walks away with a dismissive huff, leaving the others in his wake. Takuto continues walking as a deflated Atou reluctantly shuffles toward the pile of fallen logs. Atou hunches over the lumber in open dejection, while the two elves immediately rush in to help her. Dark elves get to work on a new wooden construction project as Takuto entrusts the plans to them. The elder elf points at a blueprint spread across a table, directing the efforts. 1 month later, the results of their labor are about to be revealed. Takuto and Atou take in the fruits of a month's worth of labor with wide, gleaming eyes, agreeing that seeing it in person is something else entirely. A female dark elf with glasses peeks in to express her deepest gratitude for being included in the inspection. A sprawling settlement has grown up among the great trees, complete with winding paths and multiple buildings woven into the forest. Takuto asks for a report on operational progress, and the elf happily obliges. A large multi-story wooden building stands as a testament to what the dark elves have built. The elf reports that residential construction is underway, though progress has been slower than ideal since most efforts are currently focused on cultivating the flesh trees. An elf hauls a basket toward a cluster of young sprouting trees as the report continues, noting that the joint cultivation and food storage facility is moving along smoothly. Elves bustle around a large wooden warehouse as the elf explains that the land cleared by lumbering is being put to use as a collection hub, farmland, and future construction sites for whatever larger facilities may come. The elf reports that a natural spring has been located to address water supply needs, with plans to drill additional wells in the future. The elf enthusiastically continues, noting that the very building Takuto is standing in now serves as a public office for all bureaucratic proceedings, small in scale for now, but more than sufficient. Takuto mentally maps everything out with a satisfied nod, pleased that functional facilities were prioritized and quietly impressed that the elf took initiative on things he never even specified. Takuto reflects that all 3 pillars of his national development plan, internal development, research, and military affairs, are progressing smoothly. Takuto gazes out a window with quiet contentment, something more important still on his mind. 3 dark elves chat and smile while carrying a tray of plants, their lively energy a stark contrast to the broken people they once were, and Takuto quietly marks this as his first real achievement. The bespectacled elf bows toward Takuto with deep sincerity, speaking on behalf of all the dark elves and pledging their lifelong service in gratitude for the profound grace their king has bestowed upon them. The elf looks slightly nervous and self-conscious, clutching her ledger as she finishes speaking. Takuto's glowing-eyed silhouette radiates quiet warmth as he tells his people that having them as citizens is truly amazing. The elf girl completely breaks down in tears, overwhelmed by emotion. The elf girl collapses to her knees sobbing while the elf man and Takuto stand over her, the latter awkwardly trying to tell her not to cry while admitting he understands exactly how she feels. The elf girl composes herself enough to report that daily necessities are still short on manpower, meaning they will still need to rely on the king's direct involvement for the time being, and the palace, too, remains without dedicated staff. Takuto reassures her with a raised finger, telling her not to rush the production of daily items or the quality will suffer. He will handle it himself. The elf girl reflects that their rapid development was only possible because of emergency production using tools brought from the land of the gods, essentially an unfair advantage she quietly marvels at. Takuto's silhouette calmly raises the next point. They do not really need a palace just yet, do they? Molter and the elf girl both erupt in simultaneous horror at the very suggestion. Takuto turns with mild surprise to ask Molter where he came from. Molter throws his arms out in dramatic outrage, demanding to know what kind of fool would allow the king to share a roof with his subjects, while Takuto, unbothered, suggests everyone can simply share a house. Atou steps in with a practical counterpoint, noting that while a royal palace is expensive, it generates bonus resources and raises citizen happiness, making it a worthwhile long-term investment. Takuto sweats slightly as he admits he has always wanted a floating castle eventually, wondering if they should simply build one. Atou clasps her hands together with dreamy flowers blooming around her, gushing over how romantic the idea of a floating castle sounds. Molter and the elf girl stare blankly, struggling to comprehend the concept of a castle that floats in the sky. Molter barely holds himself together, overwhelmed by the idea, but convinces himself that if the king says such a thing is possible, then their own minds are simply too small to grasp his wisdom. The elf girl looks up with wide, glittering eyes, marveling at the unfathomable depth of His Majesty's wisdom. Takuto gently brings everyone back to Earth, reminding them that houses and food production facilities are the priority right now, and counting on them to see it through. Molter and the elf girl drop into deep, solemn bows before their king, swearing with body and soul to serve him, before being caught off guard by something unexpected. A system notification announces that Takuto's popularity among citizens has hit maximum, as cries of praise ring out in his honor, leaving Takuto completely baffled by what just happened.